Harper Lane stood beneath the glowing rooftop arch in downtown Seattle with 2,000 people watching the live stream of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The wind carried the scent of early summer rain, and the soft hum of drones filming the ceremony drifted above the guests arranged in perfect white rows. She tried to steady her breath as whispers rippled through the crowd like a rising tide. The wedding planner rushed toward her, pale as a paper clutching a phone that buzzed relentlessly in her trembling hand. Her voice cracked as she spoke, telling Harper that Mason was not responding. Harper frowned and asked what that meant, but the planner's next words cut through the music like ice. "He is not coming." Harper blinked as if the world blurred, her ears filled with static. She asked again, but the planner repeated it more quietly, saying his location had gone dark, that his phone was off, that there were rumors his startup had collapsed overnight, that people online were already speculating. Harper felt her spine lock as the room spun. Camera lights continued to burn against her face because the live stream was still running. Guests pulled out their phones, some pretending to check messages while secretly recording. A few gasped softly. Others exchanged guilty looks. Harper tried to smile, tried to pretend this was a misunderstanding, but the planner shook her head helplessly. Harper turned toward the aisle, hoping Mason would appear with that careless smile he always wore, but there was only the distant glow of the city and a long, empty stretch of carpet. Her chest tightened painfully. She took one step back on shaking heels. A bridesmaid touched her shoulder, but Harper gently pushed her hand away, unwilling to fall apart under thousands of eyes. She swallowed hard, but the sting behind her eyes grew sharper. Her throat closed. The music faded into silence. Someone in the audience whispered loudly, asking if they should leave. Another murmured that they had seen a tweet claiming Mason was fleeing financial investigators. Harper inhaled sharply as a wave of humiliation coursed through her. She was alone on the rooftop, abandoned in real time as the internet watched. She felt her knees soften and the edge of her vision darken. She pressed her palm to her stomach, bracing herself as the world tilted. Then everything froze when she sensed movement in the back row. A tall figure stepped out from the shadows at the far end of the aisle. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored and unmistakably expensive. He walked with quiet certainty, the kind that made people move aside without being asked. Harper recognized him instantly, and her breath hitched. Elias Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Systems. Her billionaire boss, the man known across the tech world for his cold precision and impossible standards. He should not have been here, yet he was walking toward her with eyes steady and unreadable. Guests murmured as he approached, wondering why a man like him would come forward in the middle of this disaster. Harper stared, as if unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Elias stopped beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the calm that seemed to radiate from him. His voice was soft just for her as the crowd hushed. "Take my hand." Harper stared at his outstretched hand, stunned. She felt the heat of humiliation climbing up her neck, the weight of the cameras capturing every breath she took, and the crushing silence that demanded her reaction. She whispered a confused question, asking why he was doing this, but Elias simply met her gaze with an expression that held no pity, only quiet resolve. "Take my hand, Harper," he repeated. In the distance, a drone camera zoomed in. Comments exploded across the live stream. Her heart pounded. She had seconds to decide: run or stand, hide or fight, fall or hold herself together. Harper inhaled shakily, then slowly lifted her hand and placed it in his. The guests erupted in shocked murmurs. Someone dropped their glass. Someone whispered that he was replacing the groom. Harper fought to keep her breath steady as Elias closed his fingers around hers, grounding her with a calm she had not felt in hours. The drones captured the moment, and the viewer count spiked from 2,000 to 10,000 within seconds. Across countless screens, the hashtag Runaway Groom flashed into trending status as Harper stood beside the man no one expected. Her wedding had shattered, but the story that would change everything had just begun. Elias kept Harper's hand in his as he guided her away from the arch and down the aisle, every step feeling both surreal and unbearably heavy. Guests shifted aside in stunned silence as they passed. Harper tried to lift her chin, but the humiliation pressed on her lungs like a weight. Her veil fluttered in the breeze, and the lights from the drones above still followed her every move. She could hear scattered whispers asking if this was planned, if this was some kind of publicity act, but Elias ignored all of it and kept his pace slow and steady as if shielding her with his presence alone. When Harper stumbled slightly, he placed a hand on her lower back, keeping her upright without drawing attention. She whispered that she was fine, but her voice cracked. Elias leaned closer and murmured that she did not need to pretend and that he would not let the crowd devour her. His tone was gentle but firm, the kind of voice that made the world quiet itself for a moment. As soon as they reached the edge of the rooftop, security stepped aside for him, as if it had already been decided that this man was now responsible for her. Flashes burst from cameras positioned on the street below. Reporters had gathered within minutes, shouting questions asking where Mason was and whether the bride had been abandoned for real. Harper felt dizziness crawling up her spine. She shook her head instinctively, backing away from the railing as questions grew sharper. Elias placed a hand on her elbow and guided her toward the private elevator. The moment the door slid shut, Harper felt the first breath of relief since everything collapsed. Elias pressed a button for the garage level and finally looked at her directly. Harper still clutched the flowers Mason was supposed to take from her hands at the start of the ceremony. They drooped sadly against the bodice of her gown. She whispered, asking why he had come forward and why he looked at her like he knew exactly what she needed when she was falling apart. Elias answered simply that he had come to support an employee he admired and that he refused to stand by while she was torn open in front of the entire world. Harper scoffed softly and said admiration sounded like pity. Elias shook his head slowly and replied that pity was loud while respect was quiet and that he did not do anything out of pity. His expression did not waver as he said it, and Harper felt something in her chest shift, though she did not understand it yet. When the elevator opened, they stepped into the underground garage where a black SUV waited with tinted windows. His driver opened the door, and Elias helped Harper inside without making her feel helpless. She sank into the seat, feeling the lace of her dress scratch against her skin as the SUV pulled away from the building. The city lights blurred through the windows. Her phone vibrated endlessly with notifications, but she did not look. She stared at her reflection in the glass, wondering how her life had shattered in less than 15 minutes. Elias sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them, but his presence filled the car. Harper finally asked again why he had really attended her wedding. Elias exhaled slowly and told her he rarely went to social events, but he believed she deserved to have someone there who valued the work she did and the person she was, and that he had wanted her to feel supported. Harper looked away, not sure how to respond. She told him it was hard to believe that a billionaire CEO had chosen to stand in for her when her own fiancé had run. Elias corrected her softly, saying he had not stood in for Mason, but had stepped forward for her, and that the difference mattered. Before she could reply, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. He turned the phone so she could see. A news alert displayed a large screenshot of her stunned face on the rooftop with her hand in his. The headline read, "Harper Lane. Left at the altar in real time, and her boss steps in," and the viewer count climbed rapidly. Harper's stomach twisted. She whispered that the world thought she was pathetic. Elias said firmly that the world thought what they were told, and that it was his job and hers to shape the truth before it was twisted beyond recognition. He reached forward and lowered the car's tinted privacy screen, signaling the driver to continue without interruption. Harper covered her face with her hands, feeling everything crash on top of her again. She murmured that this would ruin her career and that her little brother would see everything online. Elias placed a hand over hers, not gripping, just anchoring. He told her they could manage the fallout if she let him help. His calmness steadied her pulse. She asked what he meant by manage. Elias explained that Thorn Systems had an entire division dedicated to crisis strategy, and that they could control narrative direction before it spiraled. Harper whispered that she did not know if she could face any of it. Elias turned his head slightly so his voice reached her ear. He said she did not have to face the world alone, not tonight, and not tomorrow morning. The SUV slowed as it approached her apartment building. Harper felt a rush of dread. Neighbors would be outside. Reporters might be waiting. Laya saw her panic and said he would walk her in so she would not face the cameras alone. She stared at him, stunned by the quiet certainty in his voice. He opened the door and stepped out first, shielding her with his body as reporters swarmed. He guided her through the flashing lights, holding her steady as she braced herself. He leaned close and whispered that she just needed to breathe and let him handle the rest. Harper felt a tremor of gratitude as he walked beside her through the chaos, and she realized she was not falling anymore, not with him there, anchoring her in a world that had tilted off its axis. Harper unlocked her apartment door with the trembling fingers and stepped inside with Elias still close behind her. The familiar scent of cedar from the old bookshelf filled the living room, but tonight it felt foreign, as if she had stepped into someone else's life. Noah rushed from the hallway wearing a hoodie and wide, worried eyes. He asked what happened and why reporters were downstairs. Harper forced a reassuring smile and said everything was fine, that she just needed to change and talk to him later. But Noah looked past her and froze when he saw Elias standing in the doorway. The Billionaire CEO, who usually appeared only on magazine covers and tech interviews, was now quietly taking off his coat, as if stepping into their small home was nothing extraordinary. Noah whispered in awe, asking if this was really Elias Thorne. Elias offered a polite nod and introduced himself gently. Harper felt embarrassment heat her cheeks. She told Noah to give them a moment, and he nodded slowly, still staring, before returning to his room. The apartment fell into a tense silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Harper pulled off her veil and placed it on the table, staring at it for a long moment. Elias spoke softly, saying that she should rest, but they needed to meet at his office in the morning to strategize before the media narrative solidified. Harper looked at him, eyes tired. She asked if it would make a difference. Elias replied that in the tech world, public perception could crush careers overnight, and that she was now at the center of a national conversation, whether she wanted to be or not. Harper wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small in a way she had not felt since her mother died. She whispered that she felt humiliated and exposed. Elias stepped closer, but not too close. He told her that humiliation was a story people tried to force on her, and that she had the power to take control of the narrative if she allowed herself to. His voice carried a quiet strength that made her believe him, even if she did not fully understand how. She thanked him for helping her, and she expected him to leave then, but Elias surprised her by pausing and asking if she needed anything before he went. The question was simple yet startling, because it was asked with genuine care, not out of obligation. Harper shook her head, trying to keep her composure. Elias nodded and finally left, telling her to rest. When the door closed, Harper let out a breath she had been holding for hours. She turned off the lights and spent the night tossing and turning, unable to silence the echo of her own humiliation. By morning, the sky outside was heavy with gray clouds and the city buzzed with new headlines. Harper arrived at Thorne Systems in a plain blazer, hoping to look composed. Her badge shook slightly in her hand as she entered the elevator. In the mirrored walls, her reflection looked hollow. When she stepped into the top-floor office, Elias was already inside waiting. He greeted her with a calm nod and gestured to the wall of screens behind him. Hundreds of headlines and social media threads filled the displays. Harper felt nauseous. Memes of her standing alone at the altar circulated online with captions like, "Abandoned bride and poor girl." A video clip taken from the live stream showed the moment she placed her hand in Elias's. It already had millions of views. Elias stepped closer and told her this was the worst stage, the uncontrolled stage, but that they were not powerless. Harper forced her attention to the screens. Reddit threads debated whether she had known about Mason's scandal. Twitter dissected her facial expressions in slow motion. Harper whispered, asking how many people were watching her life fall apart. Elias replied calmly that millions were, but that was why they were going to rebuild the narrative. Harper felt her throat tighten. She whispered that she had never asked for any of this. Elias looked at her with unexpected softness and told her that sometimes life did not ask for permission before it tried to break someone, and that strength was found in what they did next. Harper swallowed hard, feeling a small flicker of warmth in her chest, a spark of something she had not expected. Veronica Pierce, the CFO, walked into the room, her presence sharp like glass. She raised a cold brow and asked why Harper was in the executive conference room. She said bluntly that the company could not risk its reputation on an employee involved in a scandal. Harper stiffened, feeling the sting of Veronica's words. Elias's expression hardened slightly as he told Veronica that Harper was staying and that she would be part of the crisis plan. Veronica scoffed, saying this could backfire on all of them and that the bride abandoned on a rooftop was hardly someone they needed at this table. Harper lowered her gaze, feeling heat creep into her cheeks. Elias stepped forward, subtly shielding her from Veronica's line of fire. His voice was calm but firm, as he said that Harper had value far beyond the headlines and that he trusted her judgment. Veronica's eyes narrowed at that word, trust. She warned him that this was a mistake and left the room with clipped steps. When the door closed, Harper exhaled shakily and asked why he defended her so strongly. Elias studied her for a moment. His voice softened as he said it was because he knew her work, her character, and the way she carried responsibility for everyone around her, even when she should not have to, and that no one deserved what happened to her. Harper felt something tighten inside her chest, something warm and unfamiliar. For a moment she met his eyes, and the world went quiet. That was when she felt it, the first spark, a flicker of connection neither of them had invited, but neither could fully ignore. Elias turned back to the screens outlining the next steps. Harper listened, trying to focus on his words, but her mind kept drifting back to the way he had stepped in front of her, shielded her without hesitation, and spoken to her with a gentleness she never expected from him. She could not decide if that scared her or steadied her. Maybe both. Harper sat across from Elias in the glass-walled conference room, feeling the weight of everything pressing on her chest as he laid out the printed reports and online threads that continued to multiply by the hour. The morning rain streaked down the windows behind him, turning Seattle into a muted silver blur. Elias folded his hands on the table and looked at her with the steady composure of someone accustomed to navigating crises that could destroy companies, but this one he spoke about slowly, as if choosing each word with deliberate care. He explained that public sentiment could be redirected but only through visual consistency and controlled appearances, and that the world needed to see her not as the abandoned bride but as someone resilient. Someone supported someone with enough dignity to rise above humiliation. Harper whispered that she did not know what that meant. Elias leaned forward slightly and told her plainly that it meant appearing with him in public for a short period of time, not as a couple, not as a romantic gesture, but as a companion partnership. A term the media and celebrity world understood as a neutral alliance. The goal would be to provide her with a shield of stability so the narrative would shift from pity to respect. Harper stared at him, stunned. She reminded him that she already felt like a joke online and that showing up beside a billionaire would make her look like she was clinging to power or attention. Elias shook his head, saying their intention did not matter as much as what people were allowed to believe, and that if they shaped the story carefully, they could control how far the damage spread. Harper's pulse quickened. She told him she hated the idea of looking like she needed to be rescued. Elias responded with a quiet firmness that this was not rescue but strategy, and that she still controlled the direction. He added that her presence beside him would redirect the press away from Mason's disappearance, which unfairly kept dragging her name into every headline about financial scandal. He paused, then added that she had done nothing wrong and he refused to let the world treat her as collateral damage. The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. She looked away, trying to steady her breath. Elias then outlined the more practical details. They would appear at 2 to 3 public events together. Not romantic events, but corporate ones, a charity tech gala, a product forum, and possibly a board-hosted fundraiser. The appearances would be brief, but enough for the cameras to build a new storyline. Harper listened, her mind spinning. She whispered that she was uncomfortable with being defined by who she stood next to. Elias replied that after the narrative stabilized, she would stand alone again, but for now, standing beside him would give her the dignity she deserved without letting Mason's scandal stain her future. There was something in his voice that almost sounded protective, but he kept his expression composed. Harper asked hesitantly what he wanted in return. Elias looked almost surprised and shook his head, telling her he wanted nothing except her willingness to protect her own career. He emphasized again that this was not about romance. Harper told him she understood, but the idea still felt strange. She paced the room, pushing her hair behind her ear, trying to process everything. She felt exposed, confused, exhausted. Elias watched her with a calmness that steadied her more than it should have. He finally spoke again, telling her that this crisis was temporary, but the consequences could last years, and he would not let her face that alone if she did not have to. Silence settled between them as she weighed the decision. She had lost so much control of her life in the past 24 hours, and now she was being offered a way to take some of it back, even if it meant stepping into a spotlight she never wanted. She exhaled slowly, then nodded, agreeing to his plan. Though her voice trembled, Elias accepted her decision with a subtle nod, not triumphant, simply relieved. A knock interrupted them, and Noah stepped hesitantly into the conference room, holding a sandwich he had brought from downstairs as an excuse to check on her. He froze when he saw they were in the middle of a serious discussion. Harper moved toward him, telling him she was fine, but Noah looked at Elias carefully. He asked whether Elias was a good person and whether his sister could trust him. Harper felt a wave of embarrassment, but Elias responded before she could intervene. He told Noah that trust was earned, not demanded, and that he intended to earn it by making sure Harper did not shoulder the fallout of something she had not caused. Noah studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly as if giving his approval. Harper's cheeks warmed at the interaction, but she quickly changed the subject, telling Noah she would talk to him later. After Noah left, Harper turned back to Elias. The moment had softened something in the room. She whispered that she did not know what this meant for her job, her image, or her future. Elias said that what mattered most now was reclaiming her sense of self before the internet decided who she was. He stepped closer, then paused, respecting her space. He told her he believed she had more strength than she recognized and that she did not have to fight this alone. Harper's breath caught at the sincerity in his eyes. There it was again, that unexpected spark, the one she felt yesterday in his office. They both sensed it, but neither acknowledged it. Instead, Harper nodded. She told him she would follow the plan. Elias offered a gentle inclined nod and said they would begin at the tech gala the next evening. His tone remained professional, but something in his gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. Harper felt it pulse through her like a quiet echo. As she gathered her things to leave, she realized her life had shifted again, but this time not from collapse, but from the possibility of reclaiming her dignity. And as she glanced once more at Elias, she sensed that whatever lay ahead would change her in ways she was not yet ready to admit. The night of the Tech Charity Gala arrived faster than Harper expected, and she stood outside the venue staring up at the towering glass museum where Seattle's brightest entrepreneurs, scientists, and investors were gathering. The building shimmered with neon reflections from the city lights, and camera crews already lined the entrance waiting for big names to appear. Harper adjusted the neckline of her simple navy dress, chosen deliberately to appear professional rather than glamorous. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she stepped from the car. The moment she did, cameras swung toward her and questions flew in rapid succession, asking where Mason was, whether she had orchestrated the dramatic hand-holding moment with Elias, and whether she planned to speak publicly about the scandal. Harper froze for a split second, overwhelmed by the frenzy, until Elias appeared beside her, smoothing the chaos with his presence. He calmly placed a hand on her back, guiding her forward. His voice, low enough for only her to hear, told her to breathe and look straight ahead. As they moved, the crowd parted with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere buzzed with industry chatter and clinking glasses. Harper felt hundreds of eyes tracking her every move. Some whispered with pity, others with sharp interest as if waiting for her to slip. A woman in a gold gown leaned toward her friend loudly, wondering whether Harper had planned to appear with Elias so soon after her failed wedding. Another man muttered that it looked opportunistic. Harper's stomach twisted, but she kept walking. Elias noticed her tense posture and leaned slightly toward her, murmuring that spectators always filled silence with their own narratives and she should not let them write hers. His voice steadied her steps but did not ease the weight of every stare. As they entered the main hall, the energy shifted. Conversations paused. Guests watched them approach as if a headline had just stepped into the room. An investor greeted Elias with a handshake, then eyed Harper with a thin smile, saying it was brave of her to show up so soon. Harper forced a polite nod, though embarrassment simmered under her skin. Elias interjected smoothly, redirecting the investor's focus onto the charity initiative. Harper felt the subtle shield he provided and her shoulders loosened. For a moment, she almost managed to breathe normally until a sharp laugh rang out from across the room. A famous lifestyle influencer known for her ruthless commentary strolled toward them, phone in hand, recording a live video. She announced loudly to her millions of followers that the abandoned bride had arrived with her billionaire boss and she was here for the exclusive scoop. Harper froze as the influencer pushed closer, asking whether the hand-holding had been staged and whether Elias was her new relationship strategy. A tremor of humiliation ran down Harper's spine. She took a step back, but Elias moved instantly, standing between her and the phone. He spoke in a cold, even tone, telling the influencer to step away and reminding her that the event was not a circus. The influencer laughed mockingly and said that the internet deserved answers. Elias's jaw tightened, but he maintained control as he ordered security to escort her out. The influencer continued recording, claiming she was being silenced, and the video immediately went viral. Harper's heart pounded. She whispered to Elias that this was a mistake and that she should leave before things escalated further. Elias turned to her and said firmly that she had done nothing wrong and that leaving would only confirm the narrative that she could not handle pressure. Harper swallowed hard, blinking back rising panic. Guests murmured around them, forming pockets of gossip. Comments echoed through the room suggesting everything was a publicity stunt or that Harper was using her heartbreak to gain influence. Harper felt heat burning in her chest. She whispered that everyone was judging her. Elias placed a steadying hand on her arm and murmured that she needed to focus only on him, not the room. She forced herself to meet his gaze. His calm, unwavering eyes centered her for a moment. Her breath steadied. They moved toward a quieter corner where a group of engineers from Thorn Systems gathered. One of them whispered sympathetically that social media was brutal, but Harper had handled herself with impressive poise. The kindness almost made her knees buckle. She thanked him quietly. Yet the respite lasted seconds. A notification beeped on a nearby guest's phone and suddenly whispers intensified. Someone said Veronica Pierce had leaked new information. Harper froze. Within moments, guests around them scrolled through their phones, shaking their heads. A tech journalist hurried over, flashing his screen. It displayed a rumor that Harper had purposely sought Elias's attention months earlier, trying to secure a promotion through personal connections. The implication was insidious. Harper felt her stomach drop. She turned to Elias, panic rising. Elias took the journalist's phone, studied the rumor, then returned it without a word. His expression sharpened with a quiet fury she had never seen before. He told Harper that Veronica had crossed a line and they would address it. Harper felt sick and said she could not survive another round of humiliation. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He told her to forget the noise, that public perception changed quickly, especially when anchored by truth, and that she needed to trust the plan. Harper looked down, fighting tears. She told him she felt like a burden. Elias's gaze softened, and for a moment the world around them blurred. He said that burdens were heavy because people tried to carry them alone, and she did not need to do that tonight. Harper inhaled, shakily, nodding. They moved toward the stage where Elias was scheduled to speak. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight focused on him. Harper watched from the side, feeling strangely grounded by his presence. His speech addressed innovation and community, but he briefly paused, looked toward her, and added a subtle remark about empathy and resilience in difficult times. His tone held quiet admiration. Several guests followed his gaze and murmured approval. For the first time that night, Harper felt something shift. They were not whispering about her weakness, but about her strength. After the speech, Elias returned to her side and offered his arm. Cameras clicked rapidly. Harper hesitated, but placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. Not for show, but because she needed the support. As they walked through the crowd, she whispered that she was sorry for causing trouble. Elias shook his head, saying she was not the cause but the target, and there was a difference. When they reached the exit, Harper felt the air lighten. Outside, the cool night breeze brushed her skin, and she exhaled for the first time in hours. She whispered that maybe this was a mistake. Elias asked her gently why she thought that. Harper looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Because it feels too big for me." Elias studied her face and replied quietly, "Not if we face it together." And for the first time, Harper believed him. Harper arrived at Thorne Systems the next morning with a knot in her stomach and dark shadows under her eyes. The city outside the glass tower buzzed with the latest updates about Mason's disappearance and the scandal that had exploded around them, but the moment she stepped inside the sleek lobby, she felt the weight of something heavier. Employees glanced at her from behind monitors and coffee cups, some with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with the cold hunger of people who thrived on workplace drama. She walked quickly to the elevator, praying no one would stop her. On the executive floor, Elias was already in the conference room, surrounded by digital screens filled with breaking news. His posture was tense, his eyes sharper than usual. Harper stepped inside, and before she even greeted him, she saw the headline glowing in bold red across a major news site. Startup founder Mason Ward, under investigation for fraudulent reporting and investor deception. Harper's breath caught, and she felt the room tilt. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. She whispered, asking if it was true. Elias turned toward her slowly, as if preparing himself for her reaction. He told her quietly that the investigation had begun overnight, and that financial discrepancies within Mason's company were now being examined by federal authorities. Harper pressed a hand against her mouth. A wave of nausea rolled through her. She could barely form words as she asked why Mason had never told her any of this. Elias stepped closer, his voice gentler now. He said that people who felt cornered often hid the truth from those they cared about, believing distance would protect them. Harper shook her head, trying to blink away the sting in her eyes. She whispered that she would have stood by him if he had been honest. Elias hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "He did not trust himself enough to believe you would." The quiet empathy in his tone, not for Mason, but for her, broke something loose inside Harper. Her chest tightened. Her fingers trembled. She told Elias she needed a minute and turned away, but before she reached the door, her vision blurred completely. She wiped at her eyes, but the tears spilled faster. It was the first time she truly cried since the rooftop. Elias crossed the room with quiet, decisive steps. He did not hesitate this time. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder lightly at first, giving her a chance to step away. She didn't. His touch remained steady, warm, present. Harper felt her breath collapse into soft, ragged sobs that she had been holding in for far too long. Elias spoke in a voice low enough that only she could hear, saying that she was allowed to break that strength did not mean silence, and that she was not alone in this. Harper leaned slightly into him, not fully, but enough to draw strength from the moment. She whispered through tears that she hated feeling weak. Elias answered that vulnerability was never weakness, and that people who survived public shame deserved compassion most of all. Harper closed her eyes, breathing shakily. When she finally stepped back, Elias let his hand fall respectfully to his side. The softness in his eyes lingered, though he quickly masked it as footsteps approached. Veronica Pierce walked into the conference room holding a stack of documents. Her gaze immediately snapped to Harper's tear-streaked face, then to Elias standing close by. Something, calculating, flickered in her expression. She asked coldly whether Harper was emotionally stable enough to be in the office today. Harper stiffened, wiping quickly under her eyes. Elias shot Veronica a warning look, but Veronica continued saying the company could not afford to babysit scandal-ridden employees and that the board was concerned about Harper's presence. Harper felt the sting but stayed silent. Elias stepped forward, his voice turning crisp with authority as he told Veronica that Harper's role was not up for debate and that she would remain involved in the strategic communications for the Mason Ward situation because she understood the human angle better than anyone. Veronica tilted her head, raising a brow. She asked whether this decision was professional or personal, and whether Elias realized how it looked defending Harper so fiercely. Harper's heart pounded. She felt the accusation land like a blow. Elias did not flinch. He replied that he made decisions based on merit and integrity, and that anyone spreading internal rumors would answer directly to him. Veronica's eyes gleamed with hostility. She picked up the documents again and announced that Mason's legal team was claiming Harper had known about the financial issues and had encouraged him to hide them to avoid ruining the wedding. Harper gasped, horrified. She asked how they could even fabricate such a lie. Veronica shrugged, saying that public narratives were easy to twist, especially when the person at the center had already been humiliated on livestream. Harper clenched her fists. A spark of anger flared beneath the grief. Veronica leaned forward and said someone who had been left at the altar might do desperate things to salvage her image. Harper's breath hitched. She felt as if the floor had fallen out beneath her. Elias slammed the folder shut, his voice low and thundering as he ordered Veronica to leave the room. Veronica walked out slowly with a satisfied smirk. When the door closed, Harper collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. She whispered that she could not believe people thought she was capable of such manipulation. Elias knelt slightly to meet her eye level and told her that lies traveled quickly, but truth traveled with endurance, and they would make sure the truth outlasted the noise. Harper looked at him, her eyes damp and her voice soft as she asked why he believed in her so strongly. Elias paused. For a moment the air between them thickened with something unspoken. Then he answered simply, "I see you, Harper. Not the headlines, not the chaos. You." His words struck deeper than she expected. Harper felt a warmth that scared her rising beneath her ribs. Her phone buzzed, then interrupting the moment. It was Noah. A simple message lit up the screen. "I trust him. He looks like someone who stays." Harper pressed her lips together, her heart tightening at her brother's instinctive understanding. She looked back at Elias, who held her gaze with a steady warmth that made her feel grounded again. She whispered quietly, "Stay." "Why does that matter so much to me?" Elias asked if she had said something, and Harper quickly shook her head, looking down. But the truth was already blooming inside her, quietly, dangerously, undeniably. Whatever was happening between them was growing, and neither of them was ready to name it. Harper woke the next morning to a storm of notifications vibrating across her nightstand. The sky outside her window was still dim, Seattle wrapped in a cold, gray haze, but her phone lit her room with an ominous glow. Dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers, hundreds of messages across platforms, and a growing flood of emails with subject lines that made her stomach clench. She sat up slowly, dreading what she would see. The first headline nearly made her drop the phone. Anonymous source claims Harper Lane manipulated both her fiancé and her billionaire boss. Harper's breath stuttered. Her pulse raced as she scrolled through the full article. It twisted every piece of the story into a sinister narrative, accusing her of orchestrating her own humiliation to gain the sympathy of Elias and rise within the company. Comment sections overflowed with speculation suggesting she had broken Mason psychologically and then latched onto Elias for personal advancement. Harper felt sick. She pressed a hand against her forehead, trying to steady her breath. She clicked another article and then another. Each one was worse than the last. A particularly vicious thread on Reddit accused her of sleeping her way to the top using the wedding disaster as emotional leverage. Her vision blurred with tears. She curled forward, gripping the blanket as if trying to hold herself together. Noah burst into her room seconds later, holding his phone with panic written across his face. He asked if she had seen everything online. Harper wiped her eyes, telling him she was fine, but Noah shook his head, saying she was clearly not fine. He sat beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders and telling her that none of this was her fault. Harper leaned into him, exhausted. She whispered that she did not know how to survive all of this. Noah told her she did not have to be strong alone. The words hit something tender inside her. A knock sounded at the door. Harper stiffened immediately, fearing reporters had found their apartment again. But when Noah opened it, Elias stood there wearing a dark coat, eyes sharp with concern. He stepped inside without ceremony, scanning Harper's face. He asked gently if she had seen the latest attacks. Harper nodded, unable to speak. Elias's jaw tightened, a sign of his rising anger. He told her that they needed to leave Seattle for a few days until the storm settled and that trying to fight this from the center of the chaos would only bury her deeper. Harper shook her head, saying she could not run again, that people already thought she was weak. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice with calm authority. He told her that stepping back was not running, and that sometimes survival required retreat, not surrender. Harper looked at him, uncertain. Noah cleared his throat and said quietly that he trusted Elias's judgment and that Harper needed space to breathe. Elias offered a small nod toward Noah, a silent acknowledgement. After a long moment, Harper exhaled shakily and agreed. Within an hour, Elias arranged a discreet company car to pick them up, avoiding the swarm of reporters now camping outside her building. They drove through the rain-soaked city in silence. Harper staring out of the window at the blurred lights, feeling like she was being carried away from the life she knew. They headed west along the highway toward the Olympic Peninsula. As the city faded into misty forests, Harper felt her shoulders slowly loosen. She did not know if she felt relief or guilt for leaving, but she knew she could not endure another hour of the online war tearing her apart. The car finally stopped at a secluded cabin, hidden among towering evergreens overlooking the still deep blue waters of Lake Crescent. Mist clung to the surface like a silver veil. It was quiet in a way that made Harper's chest ache. Elias stepped out first, scanning the area with the protective awareness of someone used to danger, even though no one followed them. Harper stepped out next, breathing in the cool, sharp air. The cabin was small, rustic, elegant, and clearly prepared long before this moment. She asked if he had been here recently. Elias said he came here when he needed silence, free from board meetings, media pressure, and the relentless expectations of the world. Harper looked around the peaceful landscape, then back at him, and whispered that she could see why he returned here. Inside the cabin, warm light glowed from the stone fireplace. The living room was cozy with soft blankets, earthy tones, and bookshelves filled with classic literature. Harper sank onto the couch, letting her body finally relax for the first time in days. Elias sat across from her, not too close, but close enough she felt anchored by his presence. He watched her quietly until she finally said that the rumors were killing her. He replied softly, saying that lies were loud, but truth was patient, and that time would expose who was manipulating the story. Harper told him she felt foolish for ever trusting Mason and weak for needing protection now. Elias leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. He told her that trusting someone was never foolish and that she had given Mason something he did not know how to hold. She stared at him, startled by the clarity of his words. She whispered, asking how he knew so much about broken trust. The room grew still. Elias hesitated, then spoke in a voice she had never heard from him. He told her that his mother had died from cancer when he was 14 and his father retreated into work, never learning how to be present. He grew up believing that leaning on others was a risk he could not take. Harper's heart softened at the unexpected vulnerability. She whispered, apologizing for asking. Elias shook his head, saying he wanted her to know that strength did not come from being untouched, but from surviving what tried to break you. Harper felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time not from pain. She whispered, thanking him not for protecting her, but for staying. Elias looked at her with something warm and unguarded in his eyes. The fire crackled softly between them, filling the silence with gentle heat. The tension shifted a slow burn, neither of them tried to push away. Harper inhaled deeply, feeling safer than she had in days. She caught Elias watching her with an intensity that made her heart flutter. She whispered that he did not have to do all this for her. Elias replied just as softly. "I know." Then he added, "But I would do it again." Harper felt her breath catch. Something quiet and powerful settled between them, a bond they had not named but could no longer ignore. Outside, the lake shimmered under the fading light, the world momentarily forgetting them as they sat close enough for their walls to crack just a little more. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows in soft gold bands, warming the wooden floors and brushing against Harper's lashes as she slowly woke from the first real sleep she had gotten in days. The silence felt strange at first, almost unreal, after the chaos of Seattle's relentless noise. She sat up, pressing a hand to her temple, expecting her stomach to twist with panic as it had every morning since the wedding disaster. But instead, she felt something else, a fragile sense of calm. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stepped quietly into the main room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rosemary. Then she stopped in the doorway. Elias stood in the small kitchen, sleeves rolled to his forearms, quietly slicing bread while a skillet sizzled with eggs. The Billionaire CEO, feared across tech forums, was standing barefoot in a cabin kitchen making breakfast. For a moment, Harper only stared, struck by the gentle domesticity of it. Elias looked up, noticing her presence. He said good morning in a voice softer than she was used to hearing from him. Harper murmured a greeting back, her cheeks warming unexpectedly. She asked if he had cooked all of this. Elias gave a small nod, saying he liked starting the day with something simple because it reminded him that not everything in life demanded strategy or control. Harper watched him for a quiet beat, then whispered that she did not know he cooked. Elias replied that there were many things people did not know about him, mostly because no one cared to look past the image. A pause settled between them, warm and strangely intimate. She stepped closer, taking a seat at the small wooden table. Elias placed a plate in front of her and sat across from her, his posture relaxed in a way she rarely saw at the office. Harper picked up her fork, then hesitated, looking at him. She whispered that she did not know how to be in a moment of peace anymore. Elias rested his hands on the table and told her to try eating slowly to let her body remember what calm felt like. Her chest tightened. She took a bite. The simple flavors grounded her immediately in a way she had not expected. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence filled with glances they did not fully acknowledge. After breakfast, Harper stepped outside onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself as she inhaled the crisp mountain air. Mist drifted lazily over the lake's surface. She heard the door open and close behind her. Elias joined her, leaning against the wooden railing, hands in his pockets. For a long moment, they simply watched the water. Elias finally spoke, saying that people rarely remembered how to breathe properly when they were drowning in public judgment, and that sometimes the body needed nature more than explanations. Harper nodded slowly. She whispered that she felt guilty leaving Seattle when people were tearing her apart online. Elias turned his head slightly, studying her profile. He told her softly that retreat was not surrender, and that she had spent her entire life taking care of others without ever giving herself permission to step back. Harper looked at him, her throat tightening. She whispered, asking if he really believed she could survive all of this. Elias answered immediately without hesitation, yes. Because you do not break the way other people do. You bend, and bending means you still stand. Harper sucked in a breath. Those words wrapped around something fragile inside her and held it gently. She whispered almost to herself that she wished she could believe that. Elias replied quietly, "I believe it enough for both of us." The warmth in his eyes pulled at her in ways she did not want to name yet. She stepped back onto the porch and sat on the wooden steps. Elias followed, sitting beside her, leaving just enough space not to overwhelm her, but close enough for her to feel his presence. They talked quietly about small things, their childhoods, the moments that shaped them, the fears they normally kept hidden. Harper found herself telling him about her mother's illness, her father's absence, her struggle to raise Noah while balancing work. She had never told anyone these things, not even Mason. Elias listened with a stillness that made her feel seen in a way she rarely experienced. When she finished, he told her that she had carried too much for too long and that she deserved the softness she never allowed herself to receive. Harper swallowed hard, her eyes shining. She whispered, thanking him. Elias looked away briefly, almost as if the intensity of the moment unsettled him too. Hours passed gently. They walked along the lake trail, the trees towering above them with quiet protection. Harper felt lighter with every step. Later that afternoon, Elias's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. Harper asked what it was. Elias hesitated, then told her the news she dreaded but expected. Mason was back in Seattle. Harper felt her heartbeat stumble. She asked if he was okay. Elias replied that he appeared physically fine but was speaking to lawyers and reporters. Panic flared inside Harper. She said she needed to return to the city to tell her side before Mason twisted it against her. Elias disagreed immediately, saying she owed Mason nothing, and that walking back into the war zone before regaining her strength would crush her. Harper shook her head, insisting she had to face what scared her. Elias stepped closer, his eyes steady. He said that she had already faced enough and that Mason's choices were Mason's consequences, not hers. Harper whispered that she needed answers. Elias exhaled deeply, the tension in his jaw subtle but visible. He told her that if she wanted to go back, he would accompany her, not to shield her, to stand with her. Harper's breath caught. She nodded slowly. Elias reached for her hand instinctively but paused halfway, giving her the space to choose. Harper looked at his extended hand, trembling at the meaning behind it. She gently placed her hand in his and felt a spark rush through her chest. Not a spark of chaos or fear, a spark of trust. They drove back toward Seattle as the sun dipped behind the mountains, turning the sky into molten gold. Harper leaned her head against the window, watching the colors blur. She felt Elias's gaze on her once or twice, but she pretended not to notice the warmth that pooled inside her each time. When they crossed into the city again, it felt heavier than before, not because she feared returning, but because she was no longer returning alone. Something between them had shifted, something quiet, something profound, something she could no longer deny. Seattle's skyline rose ahead of them in cold steel and cloud as the car crossed the bridge back into the city. Harper pressed her palm against the window, watching the familiar streets blur beneath the weight of dread slowly pressing into her ribs. She had asked to return because she needed answers, needed closure, needed something to anchor the chaos Mason had left behind. But now, as they approached the Thorn Systems headquarters for a scheduled afternoon forum, her breath shortened. Elias noticed immediately. His hand rested near hers on the seat, not touching but close enough that she felt the steady heat of his presence. He murmured that she did not have to face any of this alone. Harper whispered that she wasn't sure if she was ready. Elias said softly that readiness was a myth created by people who feared uncertainty and that all she needed to do was show up and the rest would follow. The words steadied her just enough. The event was already in full swing by the time they arrived. Large banners hung from the lobby ceiling, reporters hovered near the registration table, and employees gathered in clusters. Conversations quieted the moment Harper stepped inside with Elias. She felt the shift immediately, a subtle pull of attention, curiosity, judgment. Harper inhaled deeply, holding firm. Elias gave her a slight nod before turning to greet board members. Harper took a few careful steps away from him, needing a moment to breathe on her own. She moved toward a display of company achievements, hoping the distraction would keep her grounded. Then she felt it, a prickle at the back of her neck. She turned. Standing at the edge of the hall, thinner than she remembered with dark circles under his eyes and hair unkempt, was Mason Ward, her runaway groom, her almost husband. He stared at her with a mixture of shame, desperation, and something Harper could not recognize. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. Mason stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, afraid it would bolt. Harper froze. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Employees began whispering, watching with undisguised fascination. Cameras shifted. Mason whispered her name softly, almost reverently. Harper's heart thudded once hard. She told him to keep his voice down. Mason's eyes filled with something like regret as he said he knew she must hate him, but he had come to explain everything. Harper clenched her jaw. She whispered that explanations did not come after abandoning someone at the altar. Mason looked around wildly, begging her to give him a moment, saying he had panicked that the financial investigation had spiraled out of control, that he thought she would resent him, that he believed disappearing would save her. Harper felt heat rise in her throat. She whispered harshly that losing her publicly was not saving her. She stepped back instinctively when Mason reached for her hand. He froze. The distance between them expanded. The stir in the room grew louder. Mason swallowed and said this was all being blown out of proportion, that the investigators were exaggerating, that he needed her to stand by him so he wouldn't lose everything. Harper stared at him, stunned. She asked if he truly believed she would help him after he destroyed her dignity in front of thousands. Mason insisted that the only way to fix his reputation was for her to say she forgave him, and that they were working things out. Harper's heart twisted painfully. She said in a low, shaking voice that she had spent days drowning in humiliation while he hid, and now he was asking her to fix his image. Mason's face hardened defensively. He said she owed him a chance to explain. Harper's voice sharpened as she replied she owed him nothing. People around them fell silent. Mason took a step closer and hissed under his breath that the media attention could still ruin her too. He said if she did not help him redirect the narrative, the investigation would drag her into it anyway. Harper felt the familiar sting of fear crawl up her spine. Mason leaned closer, lowering his voice. He said they could blame stress, miscommunication, expectations, anything, but she needed to help him. Harper could barely breathe. She whispered that truth mattered, and Mason scoffed, saying truth never saved anyone. He said perception was all that counted. At that moment, a shadow shifted behind Harper. She felt the air change and turned to see Elias standing several feet away, watching the scene with unreadable calm. He had not intervened. He had not moved to shield her. He was letting her choose her ground. Something inside Harper steadied as she realized that. Mason looked over Harper's shoulder, his expression tightening when he saw Elias. He said bitterly that of course Elias was here, that she had apparently traded one man's downfall for another man's protection. Harper's breath snapped sharply. Mason gestured at the room, accusing her of using the wedding disaster to get closer to her billionaire boss. The accusation felt like a slap. Harper stepped forward, voice rising just enough for those around them to hear. She said clearly that she had not used anyone. She said Mason left her alone in front of everyone, and Elias only stepped forward after Mason made his choice. The room shifted, sensing the shift in power. Mason's face flushed. He reached again for Harper's hand, but she pulled away swiftly. She whispered in a voice full of fracture but full of strength that he ran when she needed him, and that she would never allow him to rewrite the story into something that painted her as the villain. Mason's mouth fell open. Elias remained silent, but the faintest flicker of pride crossed his eyes. Harper's hands were trembling, but her voice did not waver. She breathed slowly and said the words that would echo through the room long after this moment passed. "You ran." He stayed. The room fell into stunned silence. Conversations died instantly. Phones lowered, breath held. Mason stumbled back, shaken by the clarity of her words. Harper felt her chest rise slowly with a breath that tasted like reclaiming her life. She had finally said what needed to be said, not just to Mason, but to herself. And Elias, standing behind her like a quiet anchor, did not need to say a single word. The air in the forum hall thickened with tension after Harper's confrontation with Mason, and although applause never came, something in the energy shifted in her favor. People stepped aside for her now, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. Still trembling, she walked toward a quieter corner near the refreshment table, needing a moment to breathe. Elias remained several steps behind her, giving her space, yet Harper felt his presence like a grounding force. Before she could steady herself, Veronica Pierce approached with slow, deliberate steps, her expression carved from ice. She carried a thin folder in her hand as if it were a weapon. Harper forced a polite nod, but Veronica's smile was sharp and false. Veronica said she had been reviewing some internal reports and had discovered concerning inconsistencies involving Harper's communication with Mason in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Harper froze. She asked quietly what Veronica was implying. Veronica's smile widened with cruel satisfaction. She opened the folder, revealing printed email screenshots and financial summaries. She claimed that Harper had encouraged Mason to delay disclosure of his company's financial problems until after the wedding to protect her own image. Harper's blood ran cold. She whispered that she never sent any such messages. Veronica tilted her head mockingly, asking if Harper was sure she remembered everything correctly because stress could cloud judgment. Harper felt a rush of heat behind her eyes. Veronica then said that given the recent public scandal, she had presented these findings to several board members who were now questioning Harper's intentions and her continued presence in the company. Harper's breath hitched. She said firmly, "These emails were fabricated." Veronica shrugged elegantly, saying that digital trails could be interpreted many ways and that unfortunately guilt often became truth in the public eye. Harper took a shaky step back, unable to process the accusation. Veronica leaned closer, speaking in a soft, poisonous tone. She said that Elias's blatant favoritism had put the company in a precarious position and that employees were whispering about Harper manipulating him. Harper's stomach twisted. Veronica added that loyalty was admirable but foolish when one woman's chaos threatened years of corporate reputation. Harper felt the ground shift beneath her. Before she could respond, Elias appeared at her side, his expression colder than she had ever seen. He asked Veronica to repeat what she had said. Veronica's composure flickered, but only slightly. She handed the folder to Elias and said she was simply protecting the company from someone whose judgment had been compromised. Elias scanned the documents, his jaw tightening, his posture rigid. When he finally spoke, his voice vibrated with controlled fury. He said these emails were fake, and Veronica knew it, and that planting fabricated evidence to destroy an employee's credibility was not only unethical, but illegal. Veronica folded her arms, maintaining her calm facade. She said she had done nothing beyond presenting concerning information. Elias stepped closer, towering over her. He said coldly that she had made a grave mistake. Veronica lifted her chin and replied that he was risking everything for a woman he barely knew. And worse, she added, he was letting his emotions compromise his leadership. Harper felt breathless hearing that. Elias responded sharply, saying his decisions were driven by truth, not emotion, and that Harper had done nothing but survive a disaster she never caused. Veronica smirked. She said she would relay his position to the board and walked away with calculated grace. When she disappeared around the corner, Elias exhaled, shaking with restrained anger. Harper touched his arm gently, asking what was happening. Elias turned to her, his expression softening immediately. He said that Veronica had always feared losing power and now saw Harper as a threat to her influence. Harper shook her head, saying she never wanted to threaten anyone. Elias said he knew, but some people clung to power so tightly they burned anything that made them feel replaceable. Harper whispered, asking what would happen next. Elias said that until he cleared the false accusation, she would be placed on temporary leave, but he emphasized it was not a punishment and he would resolve everything. Harper blinked, stunned. She asked if she was being suspended. Elias's eyes softened with regret. He said it was a protective measure because Veronica's accusations needed to be formally addressed. Harper felt a hollow ache spread through her chest. She whispered, asking why this kept happening, why every time she tried to stand something knocked her down. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice with rare tenderness. He said because the truth takes longer to rise, but it rises stronger. Harper swallowed hard, fighting tears. Then something shifted. From behind the tall indoor plants, Harper overheard voices, two employees saying that it was obvious she had seduced Elias to climb the ranks, that she had planned the wedding disaster to draw sympathy, and that she was dangerous for the company. Harper flinched as if slapped. Elias heard it too. His face hardened. He turned sharply and told the whispering employees to leave immediately, his tone cutting like steel. They scattered in fear. Harper pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back a sob. She whispered to Elias that now everyone hated her. Elias lowered his voice to a whisper meant only for her. He said they hated the story, not her, and stories could be rewritten. Harper felt tears spill over finally. She whispered that she did not want him to ruin his reputation trying to save hers. Elias shook his head firmly. He said saving her was not what he was doing. He said he was standing with her because he trusted her, because he admired her strength, and because she deserved better than being torn apart by lies. Harper stared at him, the world falling into quiet around them. She whispered, asking if he truly trusted her. Elias said in a tone so gentle, it broke something inside her. "I do, more than you know." Harper's chest tightened painfully but beautifully. She felt seen, valued, believed. And it was that moment that Veronica rounded the corner again, not seeing Harper behind Elias, and hissed into her phone that she would not let a nobody dismantle everything she built, and she would destroy whatever connection Harper and Elias had. Harper's breath caught. Elias tensed, hearing it too. Veronica froze, realizing she'd been overheard. Elias stepped forward, voice low and deadly, telling her she had crossed the final line. Veronica's composure cracked for the first time. She turned and hurried away, her heels clicking sharply. Harper's knees almost buckled. Elias caught her by the arm, steadying her gently. She whispered that she never wanted this fight. Elias said softly, "You did not choose the fight. They brought it to you, but you are stronger than every one of them." Harper looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes, and for the first time the fear in her chest began to shift into something else. Resolve. Harper left the Thorn Systems building with her badge still warm from being turned in each step, feeling heavier than the last as she walked toward the waiting car Elias had arranged for her. The afternoon light washed the city in muted gray, matching the hollow ache inside her chest. She sat in the back seat, staring numbly out the window while the driver pulled into traffic. Her thoughts churned in a fog of disbelief, humiliation, and a creeping sense of failure she could not shake. Being placed on temporary leave felt like losing the thin thread of normalcy she had fought desperately to hold on to. Elias had tried to soften the blow, telling her it was only until the false accusations could be dismantled, but her heart refused to let logic win. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap and whispered to herself that she had caused him too much trouble, that she was dragging him into a storm he never asked for. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. When the car reached her apartment, the driver walked her inside through a cluster of reporters waiting near the entrance. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted her name, accusing, demanding, dissecting. Harper ducked her head and rushed inside, her breath trembling as she closed the door behind her. The apartment was quiet, painfully so. Noah had gone to a friend's house after school so she could rest, but the emptiness only amplified the sharp ache in her chest. She took off her coat and sank onto the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest. For the first time since the rooftop, she felt completely alone. Not alone like before, alone in a way that felt like she had willingly stepped away from the one person who had stood beside her with unwavering steadiness. She buried her face into the pillow, tears soaking the fabric as she whispered that Elias deserved someone who wasn't a storm. Hours passed in a blur. Evening shadows crept across the room. Her phone lit up repeatedly on the table calls from Elias, messages from Noah, alerts from news channels, but she felt paralyzed. She didn't want Elias to see her like this, fragile and drowning. He had given her strength when she had none, but she couldn't keep leaning on him every time she fell. That wasn't fair, not to him and not to herself. A soft knock sounded. Harper stiffened, wiping her eyes as she stood. She opened the door a few inches and froze. Elias stood there. His coat was still damp from the drizzle outside, his expression a mix of concern and barely restrained frustration. He stepped inside before she could protest, closing the door gently behind him. Harper looked away, trying to hide her tearful face. She whispered that she didn't want him to see her like this. Elias's voice softened, but carried an unmistakable firmness as he asked why she hadn't answered any of his calls. Harper crossed her arms over herself. She said she needed space to think. Elias stepped closer, stopping only when she backed into the arm of the couch. He said space was fine, but disappearing into silence wasn't. Harper's voice cracked as she said she didn't want to keep taking from him, that she didn't want to become a burden he felt obligated to carry. Elias's jaw tightened as if the words hit him physically. He asked her quietly if she truly believed he was helping her out of obligation. Harper's breath trembled. She whispered that every time she fell apart he was there to hold her up, and sooner or later the company the world. Even he himself would resent her for it. Elias stepped even closer, his voice low and steady. He said he did not save people out of pity. He stayed for the ones who deserved someone in their corner. Harper shook her head, tears spilling again. She whispered that he shouldn't stay, not when everything about her life was collapsing and dragging him down with it. A silence stretched between them, sharp and aching. Elias looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something wounded. He asked softly, "Is that what you think I feel?" Dragged down. Harper's chest tightened. She whispered that she didn't know what he felt, that she couldn't let herself hope for anything. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. When he opened them, the look in them made her breath catch. He stepped forward, reaching out slowly with a tenderness she had never seen so clearly from him. He placed one hand lightly on her cheek, his thumb brushing a tear away. His voice dropped to a whisper filled with something raw and honest. "You do not take from me, Harper. You give me something I did not know I needed." Harper felt her knees weaken. She opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden loud vibration broke the moment. Her phone buzzed violently on the table. Harper reluctantly stepped back, wiping her cheeks, and picked up the phone. A new message glowed on the screen. An email from an anonymous sender. Subject line, "We know where you live." Attached was a blurry photo of her outside the company building earlier that day. Her blood turned to ice. Elias saw her face drain of color and immediately reached for the phone. When he read the message, his expression darkened into something dangerous. He said they were leaving immediately. Harper's voice trembled as she asked where they were going. Elias said firmly to his place where security was tighter and she would be safe. Harper shook her head, insisting she couldn't just abandon her home. Elias stepped closer, his tone gentler but unyielding. He said, "Harper, this is not a suggestion. Someone has crossed a line and your safety is the only priority now." Harper's breath became shallow. Panic clawed at her chest until she felt Elias take hold of her shoulders, grounding her in a way nothing else could. "Look at me," he whispered. Harper raised her eyes to his. "You do not have to be strong alone." His words cracked her entirely. She collapsed forward against him, her forehead against his chest, her hands gripping the fabric of his coat as if he were the only solid thing left in her world. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her firmly but gently. He lowered his head until his cheek brushed her hair. "I am here," he murmured. "I am not going anywhere." Harper's tears soaked into his coat, and for the first time since the rooftop she let herself lean without fear of falling. This was the breaking point. But it was also the beginning of something else, something steadier, deeper, impossibly real. Harper stood in the polished marble lobby of the Seattle Press Forum the next morning feeling a kind of calm she had not felt in weeks. Not a fragile calm, but a forged one, born from sleepless hours. Tears soaked into Elias's coat, a deco in the shaking realization that she could not keep letting the world define her. Elias stood beside her, his hand hovering near her back without touching, subtly ready to steady her if she wavered. He had insisted she stay at his penthouse overnight for safety. She had reluctantly agreed, and though neither of them voiced it aloud, they both knew something had shifted in the quiet between them. but now she stood upright on her own. She inhaled slowly as reporters gathered outside the double-glass doors, their voices rising in an eager hum. Flashing lights reflected off the windows like a swarm of restless stars. Noah stood to her right, holding her hand briefly before letting go, offering her a trembling but determined smile. He told her softly that Mom would have been proud of her. Harper blinked back unexpected tears and cupped his cheek gently before nodding to the security guard. The doors opened. The crowd roared with overlapping questions. Harper stepped forward alone. Cameras flashed so brightly she had to blink hard. Elias and Noah stayed behind the podium, waiting for her signal. She reached the microphone, adjusted it with steady fingers, and let the room fall into silence. She scanned the sea of faces, journalists, commentators, bloggers, each waiting to carve their own story from whatever she said next. Harper's voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but carried through the room like a blade cutting clean through noise. "Thank you for being here." The room stilled. She continued. 2 weeks ago, I was supposed to get married. Instead, I was left standing alone in front of thousands of people. My private life became public humiliation in real time. I didn't choose that. I didn't script that. I didn't expect it. Her hands didn't shake. She continued. And when my fiancé ran, the world ran with him. They ran with assumptions, with rumors, with inventions. A few reporters lowered their cameras, paying genuine attention. She said quietly, "I have been accused of manipulating my fiancé, manipulating my boss, using heartbreak for personal gain." Harper paused, letting the lies hang in the air stripped of their power. Then she spoke the truth. "Mason Ward ran from me because he was afraid of his own truth. The federal investigation into his company has nothing to do with me. I knew nothing about it. I was planning a wedding, not a cover-up." A murmur traveled through the crowd. Harper continued, her voice unwavering. "As for Elias Thorne, he did not save me. He did not rescue me. He stepped forward when I was collapsing because he has integrity, not because I asked him to. We appeared together publicly, not as a romance, not as a scandal, but as a professional partnership to stabilize the narrative that the internet threatened to destroy." Elias lifted his gaze toward her, pride flickering in his eyes. Harper continued. "I have been painted as a manipulative woman climbing the corporate ladder. In reality, I have been fighting to keep my brother safe, my job intact, and my identity from being buried under lies." Her breath steadied. She felt Noah's silent encouragement, and then she spoke the hardest truth of all. "I lost myself in trying to survive everyone else's expectations. Today, I'm taking control back." A wave of silence expanded through the room. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for more. Harper straightened her shoulders. She said, "I will not blame Mason for his fear, but I will not carry the consequences of his choices. I will not blame Veronica Pierce for her ambition, but I will not let her use my heartbreak as leverage for corporate power." Veronica's name rippled through the audience, sparking sharp whispers. Harper pressed on. "I am not a tragedy. I am not a scandal. I am not a pawn." Her voice strengthened. "I'm someone who refused to let the internet decide who I am. I'm someone who showed up today even though every instinct told me to hide. That is not manipulation. That is survival. That is strength." The room fell into a heavy, thoughtful hush. She took a small step back from the podium. "Thank you." Reporters erupted into questions, but Harper raised a hand. She would answer only one. A journalist near the front asked, "What do you want people to understand most about what happened to you?" Harper inhaled deeply. "That heartbreak doesn't make you weak," she said softly. "It just shows you where you need to rebuild." She stepped back. Elias and Noah approached her immediately. Noah hugged her tightly, whispering she had been perfect. Elias didn't touch her but stood close enough that she felt the steadiness radiating from him. He murmured, "You reclaimed your voice. You did that." Harper looked up at him, her breath catching at the emotion in his eyes. But before she could respond, a rush of notifications buzzed across every phone in the room. Headlines were already shifting. Public sympathy rising, Mason facing pressure, Veronica trending for internal sabotage, Truth traveling slowly as, yeah, but traveling strong. Harper stepped outside with Elias and Noah into the cool Seattle air. For the first time, she felt the world not closing in but opening. She whispered to Elias, "It's strange. I feel like I'm standing again." Elias looked at her with a softness that made her chest ache in the best way. "You were never truly on the ground," he said quietly. "You were just finding your footing." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Something new was building inside her. Something steady. Something brave. Something ready to breathe again. The rooftop was quiet when Harper stepped out into the cool Seattle night, the same rooftop where her life had shattered weeks ago, the same rooftop where she had stood alone beneath blinding lights while the world watched her fall. Tonight, there were no drones, no guests, no aisle lined with white petals. Only the city humming below the breeze lifting her hair and the soft glow of string lights Elias had arranged earlier without telling her. He stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, his silhouette outlined by the skyline behind him. When he turned toward her, something in Harper's chest tightened. She walked slowly toward him, each step echoing memories she had avoided for too long. Elias watched her with unreadable softness, his eyes tracing her approach as if she were the only part of the view that mattered. Harper stopped a few feet away, her breath unsteady. She whispered that she didn't think she would ever set foot on this rooftop again. Elias replied quietly that sometimes we have to return to the places that broke us to understand how far we've come. The cool air brushed against her skin, but she didn't shiver, not this time. Harper looked out at the city lights and whispered almost to herself that she felt tired of running. The words slipped out before she realized they were the truest ones she had ever spoken. Elias's posture shifted slightly as if those words carried weight he had long been hoping she would release. He asked gently, running from what Harper didn't answer at first. She stared at her hands clasped together. From everything she said softly. From the world. From myself. From the fear that if I stop moving, someone will hurt me again. A long silence stretched between them as the breeze rustled the lights overhead. Elias stepped a little closer, not touching her, but close enough she could feel his warmth. His voice was low as he said, "You do not have to run anymore, Harper. Not from any of that. Not from me." Harper's breath caught. She turned to him fully. In the soft golden light, she could finally see the vulnerability in his eyes, the same one he kept hidden behind control and composure. Elias said, her name softly as if it were something precious. She felt her knees weaken. Harper whispered then, "So stay." The words trembled through her voice, surprising even herself. Elias looked stunned for a fraction of a second, then something warm and fierce flickered in his eyes. "Stay," he echoed quietly. Harper felt her heart pound against her ribs. "With you," she whispered. The question left her lips like a confession of its own. The rooftop suddenly felt impossibly small, holding only the two of them and the gravity pulling them closer. Elias stepped forward, closing the remaining distance. The world below disappeared. His voice was soft, steady, unguarded. That day on the rooftop when I said, "Take my hand," I wasn't pretending. Harper's breath trembled as the truth sank into her skin. He wasn't pretending. Not then. Not now. Elias lifted his hand slowly toward her cheek, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. His fingertips brushed her skin with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. Harper whispered that she had been terrified to believe in anything after everything she had lost. Elias leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "Belief doesn't happen all at once," he murmured. "It happens when someone shows you they will not disappear." Harper closed her eyes, fighting the tears gathering at the edge. Tears not of pain but of something else, something she hardly recognized, hope. Elias whispered her name again as if it grounded him and asked in a voice barely above the breeze, "Do you trust me?" Harper opened her eyes. She searched his face, the man who had stepped out of the shadows to hold her when the world collapsed, the man who stayed when she gave him nothing in return except her breaking. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, I trust you." Elias exhaled softly, as if those words unlocked something inside him. His hand slid gently to the back of her neck, his thumb tracing a soothing line along her jaw. The rooftop lights glowed warmer around them, and then she stepped closer, closing the small distance that had held weeks of tension between them. Harper felt the world shift as Elias lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, not demanding, not claiming, but asking. Asking if she wanted this too. Harper answered by leaning into him, her hands gripping his shirt as her lips parted against his. The first kiss was slow, almost hesitant, filled with all the words they had both been afraid to say. A soft exhale left Elias's chest as he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss gently, not with urgency, but with reverence, as if he were learning her breath, learning her heart, learning the quiet bravery she carried. Harper felt herself melt into him, her fingers tightening at his collar as if anchoring herself to something she had never been allowed to feel before. Safety, warmth, belonging. When they finally broke apart, foreheads still touching, Harper could barely breathe. She whispered a trembling confession. "I think I was falling even before I realized it." Elias's breath brushed her lips as he murmured, "I have been falling since the moment you lifted your hand and took mine." The words wrapped around her heart with devastating gentleness. Harper smiled through tears she didn't hide. Elias brushed them away with his thumb. There was no audience tonight, no humiliation, no shadows waiting to devour her. Just two people standing where her story shattered, letting something new take root in the ruins. Harper whispered, "I'm not afraid of staying anymore." Elias cupped her face gently. "And I'm not afraid of being yours," he replied quietly. She leaned into him again, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if he had been waiting his whole life to do it. The city lights flickered beneath them, but neither looked away. For the first time since everything began, the rooftop wasn't a symbol of loss. It was the place where she began again. The next morning, the city woke slowly beneath a soft Seattle drizzle, the kind of rain that seemed to blur the world into gentle watercolor strokes. Harper stood by the wide glass windows of Elias's penthouse wrapped in one of his oversized sweaters, her fingers curled lightly around a mug of tea. Below her, the skyline hummed with quiet life, but for the first time in weeks, she felt no fear of it. The rooftop confession lingered in her mind not as a dream, but as a steady thrum in her chest. She traced her fingertip along the mug, thinking about the kiss the way Elias had looked at her afterward with a depth that made her knees weak and her heart feel terrifyingly safe. Footsteps approached. Harper turned to see Elias walking toward her, his hair slightly tousled from sleep, his posture relaxed, but his eyes warm in a way she still wasn't used to. "Morning," he said softly. Harper offered a shy greeting, her cheeks warming. Elias studied her for a moment, his gaze softening even more. "Last night wasn't a moment," he said quietly. It wasn't confusion or comfort. It was real. Harper's breath trembled. She told him she knew. He stepped closer until he stood directly in front of her, taking the mug gently from her hands and setting it aside. Harper's pulse quickened. He lifted her chin gently, searching her eyes. "This time, will you take my hand?" he said, in a low voice, not for protection, but for life. Harper's breath caught. For life. The words washed over her with terrifying beauty. She whispered, "Elias." Her voice cracked. She didn't pull away. She didn't hide. She let the truth rise inside her like a tide. "Yes," she whispered. "I will." A soft exhale left him the kind of breath a man only releases when a weight he has carried silently finally lifts. He brushed a kiss against her forehead, lingering as if committing the moment to memory. When he pulled back, Harper felt something inside her settle. Something brave. Something whole. A knock sounded then from the front door, breaking the soft bubble around them. Harper startled, but Elias placed a calming hand at her waist and went to answer it. Noah burst inside before Elias could speak, rushing to Harper with wide, excited eyes. His backpack thudded to the floor as he hugged her tightly. "You were amazing yesterday," he said, breathless. "The whole internet is realizing they were wrong." Harper laughed through her tears, hugging him back. Noah glanced between her and Elias, his eyes narrowing with the kind of teenage intuition adults underestimated. "Something is different," he said slowly. Harper froze. Elias cleared his throat lightly. Harper shot him a flustered glance, but Noah only grinned. "I'm happy for you," he whispered simply. Harper's chest constricted with tender ache. She touched his cheek, whispering thank you. Elias watched the exchange, his expression softening even further. Later that afternoon, Harper returned to Thorne Systems for the first time since her leave. Employees turned as she walked through the lobby, but the stares felt different now, not sharp but curious, not hostile but thoughtful. She took the elevator to the executive floor, her pulse steady but aware. When the doors opened, board members waited inside the conference room reviewing reports, reviewing the truth. Veronica sat stiffly at the far end, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. The internal investigation into the fabricated emails had unraveled quickly, and Harper was officially cleared, but the tension in the air was thick. Elias stood near the head of the table, nodding for Harper to step forward. She did, calmly. She addressed the board, clearly stating she was ready to return to work, that she had no intention of being defined by a scandal she did not cause, and that she remained committed to the company that had given her opportunity and stability. Her voice was poised, strong, certain. Veronica shifted uncomfortably as a board member informed her they had evidence directly linking her to the leaked fabrications. The room fell silent. Veronica stood, her face pale, and tried to defend herself, but the truth had already landed. Elias dismissed her with a cold finality that left no room for argument. Security escorted her out. The door shut behind her with a soft but decisive click. Harper exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from her chest. The board voted unanimously to reinstate her. But more than that, they approved a decision Elias had submitted weeks earlier before the wedding disaster, before the world knew her name. Harper Lane would become the new PR director. Harper covered her mouth, stunned. She turned slowly toward Elias, but he looked away humbly, pretending to straighten paperwork. After the meeting, she pulled him aside, asking softly if he had made the recommendation because of the scandal. Elias shook his head, gazing down at her with quiet honesty. "I made it because you are the person I trust to speak the truth when it matters." Harper felt warmth bloom inside her, so sharp it almost hurt. As they stepped out into the hallway, employees glanced their way again, but this time with admiration. Noah waited near the elevator, beaming. "You're the new PR director," he shouted, whispering loudly. "The coolest thing ever." Harper hugged him tightly, feeling joy rise through her chest. Elias watched them, his eyes reflecting something soft and protective, something that almost looked like love, though neither had spoken the word yet. As they all rode down the elevator, Harper felt the weight of choice settling not as burden, but as light. She had chosen truth, chosen dignity, chosen herself, and now she chose him back. They exited the building into the afternoon sun. Harper reached for Elias's Kesa's hand, not out of panic or fear, but out of certainty. He looked down at her fingers interlaced with his, then back into her eyes with quiet awe. Harper whispered, "I choose you, Elias, not because you saved me, because you stayed." Elias drew her into a soft kiss, gentle and grounding. "And I choose you, Harper," he murmured, "every time." Noah groaned playfully, but smiled broader than both of them. Harper rested her head briefly against Elias's shoulder, letting her heart breathe, letting her choice settle fully. For the first time in her life, love did not feel like running. It felt like standing still in the right place next to the right person with the right future opening in front of her. 1 year later, the world felt softer in ways Harper never expected. The sunlight shimmered gently across the calm surface of Lake Union, where a small, intimate gathering had formed along the wooden pier. White lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting halos over the water as quiet laughter drifted from the handful of friends and family who had come not for a spectacle, but for something real. Harper stood at the edge of the dock smoothing the simple ivory dress she wore. No lace train, no drones hovering above, no flashing lights, just the soft murmur of the lake against the wood and the scent of fresh pine from the shoreline. Her heart fluttered not from nerves but from a quiet joy she could finally breathe into. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Noah stood there in a crisp shirt, slightly crooked tie, and that proud grin he had grown into this past year. He offered her a small bouquet he had made himself, white tulips and soft greenery. "You look like hope," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion he didn't bother hiding. Harper's eyes softened as she kissed his forehead, whispering thank you before he walked ahead to take his place among the guests. Harper inhaled deeply, savoring the moment. This wedding was nothing like the one she had run from. There were no thousands of viewers, no impossible expectations, no fear, just truth and choice woven into every breath. The music began softly, an acoustic guitar played by one of Elias's closest friends. Harper took her first step down the pier, her heart warm. Elias stood at the end of the dock waiting for her. No tailored tux, no perfectly constructed persona. He wore a simple gray suit, his hair tousled by the wind, his expression open and full of tenderness. When his eyes found hers, his entire face softened into something raw and breathtaking. He had been waiting for this, for her, for them. Harper reached him and everything else disappeared. He took her hands gently, his thumbs brushing her knuckles in a slow rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. Elias leaned in just enough for his voice to reach her alone. This time he whispered, "I am the one waiting for you." Harper's lips curved into a soft smile, and this time she whispered, "No one ran." A hush fell over the lake as the officiant began speaking, but Harper barely heard the words. Her focus stayed on Elias, the man who had stepped out of the shadows on the worst day of her life and chosen to stay through every storm that followed. When it came time for vows, Harper spoke first. Her voice wavered, but not from sheer. "Elias," she whispered, "you found me when I was breaking and you never asked me to be anything other than myself. You held a mirror to the parts of me I had forgotten, and you taught me that strength is not silence. It is choosing to stay when running feels easier." Elias's breath caught the emotion in his eyes, unmistakable. When he spoke, his voice carried across the still water, steady and warm. "Harper, I saw you long before the world tried to define you. I saw your courage, your fire, your heart. The day I asked you to take my hand, I hoped, but I never imagined I would someday earn the right to hold it forever." Harper felt tears gather, but she didn't hide them. When the rings were exchanged, Elias's fingers trembled just slightly, a truth she would cherish forever. Their kiss came gently like the closing of a long healing wound. No cheering crowd, no cameras, just the quiet applause of the people who truly mattered. When they pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "We built this, not from what broke, but from what remained." Harper smiled, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. After the ceremony, friends drifted toward the tables set along the dock for a small dinner celebration. Noah tugged Harper into a tight hug, congratulating her and stealing a piece of bread from the table. Elias laughed softly before wrapping an arm around Harper's waist, pulling her close as they watched the lanterns glow brighter against the setting sun. Later, they slipped away to the edge of the lake, standing together in the quiet. Harper rested her head on his shoulder, and Elias pressed a soft kiss to her temple. No one watching, no pressure, no panic, just love woven from truth. As the sky deepened into twilight, Harper whispered a question that made her voice catch. "Do you ever think about that night on the rooftop?" Elias nodded slowly. "Every day, because it led me to this." He lifted her hand, kissing her knuckles. "And because you took my hand back." Harper's heart swelled with quiet certainty. Their journey had been marked by chaos, by pain, by a world desperate to twist their story, but in the end, the truth had held. Harper whispered, "I choose you again. Today, tomorrow, always." Elias smiled softly, "And I will stay, every time." They stood at the water's edge wrapped in each other as the lantern swayed above them. The world had once watched Harper fall. Tonight, the world did not watch at all, and that was perfect. Because some beginnings were meant to be witnessed only by the heart. And now, for you watching from wherever you are, a question lingers long after the last lantern fades over the water. If someone stepped forward when the world stepped back and offered you their hand with quiet, steady love, would you take it? If you made it all the way to the end of Harper and Elias's journey, then take a breath with me and sit in this moment for just a second, because stories like these are not just about billionaire romance or dramatic twists or public heartbreak. They are about the small, quiet choices that change everything. They are about the people who show up when the world looks away. And right now, I want to ask you the same question that Harper answered on that rooftop under the Seattle lights. If someone reached out their hand to you, not to save you, not to fix you, not to rescue you, but simply to stand with you, through whatever came next, would you take it? Think about that. Because every one of us has a day when the world feels too loud, when the cameras feel too close, when the truth feels too heavy, and we need someone who stays. Maybe that person is already in your life. Maybe they are still on their way. Maybe they are someone you never expected. But here on this channel, this story is a reminder that love does not always come with fireworks or dramatic, grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in a quiet voice saying, "Take my hand," when everything is falling apart. If this story touched you even a little, tell me where you are watching from. I love reading your comments every night. Tell me which part of Harper and Elias's journey spoke to you. Was it the rooftop, the healing at the lake, the press conference, or that soft vow on the pier? And if you believe someone out there deserves a love that stays, go ahead and tap the like button so more people can find this story. Subscribe if you want more long-form emotional escapes like this, because I promise you there are so many more journeys coming. Your support keeps this channel alive and helps these stories travel across the world to someone who might need them today. So before you scroll away, pause with me and answer this one last thing in the comments. If the person who stood beside you in your darkest hour whispered, "Take my hand," for the rest of your life, what would you say?